Hello everyone, welcome back. We are talking about chapter 6 today. Now we're moving into talking about how we can collect some data. So the next few chapters are dealing with just different ways to collect data and different, terminology and stuff used to describe those different methods. So this Chapter 6 is going to go over surveys and observations. So describing what people do. All right, so chapter overview. First, we're going to talk about some construct validity of surveys and polls, and then construct validity of behavioral observations. So two different ways we can collect data. And the focus of this chapter will be on how researchers use these surveys and behavioral observations to measure one variable for frequency claims. You can obviously make other types of claims using these types of methods as well, but for simplicity's sake, frequency claims, as you know, only have one variable. So we're just going to talk about frequency claims to kind of simplify these two methods of data collection. Okay, so let's start with surveys and polls. So surveys and polls are similar. Technically, the terms mean different things. So surveys typically are used when asking about a consumer product, whereas polls are used when asking about social or political opinions. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, but technically they are two different terms. In this book, we'll just use the two terms to mean the same thing. So survey and poll are methods of asking people questions, and this can be face-to-face, on the phone. It can be a written questionnaire, or it can also be online. Okay, so it doesn't matter really the format of the questions, how you're asking people the questions, but if people are answering questions, then it's going to be considered a survey or a poll. So there's different ways we can ask these questions. So there's different formats. So we'll go over those next. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can ensure that our questions are worded in a way that encourages accurate responses and also is, getting accurate responses. Okay, so question format. A few different types of questions. Each of these will have their own slide, but we have open-ended questions, forced choice format, a Likert scale, and a semantic differential format. Okay, so let's start with open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are just what it sounds like, so respondents can answer any way that they like. So an example of a question that's open-ended would be, what do you think of this class? Right? So that question you can respond to in literally any way you like. There are no limits to what answers you're going to get. So a pro for this type of question is it provides researchers with a lot of rich information, right? Because the participants can say exactly what they are feeling. A con, the main one is processing the information. So if you're getting all of these just, people writing whatever response that comes to mind, processing that information can be difficult. It's not easy to categorize the responses. So if you're trying to get like a feel of how students like your class, if you have, 200 students to go through, it's not easy to get like a general consensus of how class is going. Whereas other questions, if you write it on a scale, 1 to 10, that's a lot easier, to figure out the general consensus of the class. If you have a smaller class, open-ended questions might be better because you have time to go through and read all of them. You can get some more better information about things that maybe you can improve upon or things that, people like. But if there's a lot of participants, it can be very time consuming to go through a lot of open-ended questions. So again, good in some applications. If there's a lot of participants, you might want to restrict the amount of open-ended questions or possibly not include any open-ended questions at all. and have questions that have restricted answers. Okay, so some examples of restricted answer questions are all the next ones. So the first one's a forced choice format. You can think of this as like a multiple choice. Okay, so you can provide your opinion by choosing the best of 2 or more options. So for example, instead of asking, do you like this class? And having them respond anything, you can give them an option, yes or no. And you can do many different things with a forced choice format. So you could just have yes or no questions. You can have like statements and have them pick which statement best describes the person. So I like to be center of attention, or it makes me uncomfortable to be the center of attention. You can have more than 2 answers. So how do you like this class so far? It's okay, good, I have no idea what's going on, right? You could have multiple different questions, not just 2 options. Okay. These are good also if you're asking like political information. So if you're trying to figure out who someone's going to vote for president, you can give them the options. So out of whatever options, who they're going to choose. So forced choice format gives you a way to limit the responses, so that there's not as much differences in the responses. So when you're sorting through them, it's easier to figure out general consensus, general ideas, general trends. Okay, but forced choice, the answers are always going to be, the choices rather are always going to be like words or phrases, something like that. We also have what's called a Likert Scale, where people are presented with a statement and asked to use a rating scale to reflect their degree of agreement. So you have typically strongly agree, agree, neither, disagree, or agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So it's always going to be, a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. There can be subtle changes from this format. You can, change, how many strongly agrees. You can get rid of the middle if you want, but typically it's going to be agree to disagree, some sort of scale. So if you're asking about, this class is the hardest thing I've ever done, strongly disagree to strongly agree. You can assign, the strongly disagree to agree numbers, right? So there's numbers associated, 1 through 5. 1 is disagree, 5 is agree. But Likert scale is kind of like how much you like it. You disagree or agree, right? There's other ways we can format similar types of questions if they are not rated from strongly disagree to strongly agree, then we're going to call that a semantic differential format. Okay, so it's very similar to the Likert scale. You have a scale 1 to 5, 1 to 7, whatever your scale might be. But you're not using the adjective strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay, so for example, if you're rating your professor on level of difficulty, from a scale of 1, you could just show up and pass, to 5 is the hardest you've ever done, right? You still have that scale 1 to 5, show up and pass, so on and so forth, to 5 is the hardest, but the adjectives associated with it aren't the Likert scale. Okay, so you can have any adjectives here, as long as they're not disagree to agree, then it's considered a semantic differential format. Okay, those are different types of questions you can ask. Obviously, in some applications, different questions are going to be better depending on what you're trying to get. If you want rich information, you might want an open-ended question. If you want some sort of forced choice, you can use one of the 2 scales, or the forced choice format where you have, multiple options people can choose from. Okay. What's important is no matter what type of method of question you are asking, we want to make sure we're wording the questions well. Okay, and we're doing this, when we do this, we're interrogating the construct validity of a survey. Okay, so we're seeing how well the variable was actually measured. Okay, so are the questions asking what we're actually wanting to ask, right? And it's important that we have well-worded questions so that the questions are actually getting at what we want them to. So there's some terms that we're going to talk about here with well-worded questions. We can have leading questions, double-barreled questions, negatively worded questions. All of these are things we're going to want to avoid, and I'll explain what those are in a second. And then we're going to talk about the question order and the importance of that in a survey. Okay, so a leading question is the first type of thing that we want to avoid. This would be something that's not well written. So a leading question, so sometimes two questions seem to be asking the same thing, but they get very different responses depending on how it's worded. Okay, so for example, how fast do you think the car was going when it hit the other car? How fast do you think the car was going when he smashed into the other car? Okay, so the way we word the question can lead to a specific answer. Okay, so we want to make the questions kind of as neutral as possible so they're not influencing the way the participant's going to respond. Okay, so the goal of the survey is to capture respondents' true opinions, so questions need to be worded as neutrally as possible. So if you're using verbiage like smashed, or things that are kind of implying that someone's going fast in this example, or any type of question, anything that's not a neutral, verb or way to word it, we want to avoid that. We don't want to lead the participants to answer in a certain way. And this goes for, all types of questions. So these are examples of open-ended questions, right? But we could change this into a forced choice where you're giving them like 10 to 20 miles per hour, 20 to 30, right? Give them different speeds. Regardless of how we ask the question, we want the question itself to be as neutral as possible. Okay, if it's not neutral, then it's considered a leading question. Okay. The next type of question that's not good is a double-barreled question. And this, the name kind of tells you what it is. It's asking two questions in one, which obviously is not good. If we're asking a question, we want to make sure the response is actually a response to, what we want to know. So it's important to make sure that your question is only one question. And some of these are more obvious than others, but this can be kind of tricky to spot in some cases. But an example of a double-barrel question, do you agree that the Second Amendment in the United States Constitution guarantees your individual right to own a gun, and that the Second Amendment is just as important as your other constitutional rights? And this was a forced choice, so support, oppose, or have no opinion. So obviously there's two questions here, and this one's pretty easy to tell, but it's asking, first of all, does the Second Amendment guarantee you right to own a gun, so you can answer that. And do you agree that this is just as important as your other constitutional rights, which is a totally separate question. Okay, sometimes when we're wording a question, we don't realize that there's kind of two different statements in one. So it's really important to proofread, go back and make sure that you're only asking a single question. And if there are two questions in one, you can just split them up into two separate questions. Okay, so you would have, is the Second Amendment right to own a gun? Do you think the Second Amendment is as important as other constitutional rights? Okay, and again, this doesn't just have to be a forced choice format. Any format of a question could be double-barreled. This just is an example of forced choice. Okay, so you want to avoid that. The last thing that is important that we avoid when writing questions is negative wording. Okay, so the more cognitively difficult a question is for people to answer, obviously the more confusion there will be. So things that have negative wording or double negatives can make questions confusing, and the participant doesn't know, what the question is actually asking. If it takes them a while to kind of figure out what the question is asking, it's more likely that your responses aren't going to be accurate. So for example, people who do not drive with a suspended license should never be punished. Okay, so double negative. People who do not drive should never be. Obviously, we want to avoid questions that have double negatives or confusing wording in general, because again, we're not really testing, seeing the answer of the question. We're testing how well people can, interpret the question at this point. Okay, so some people might not understand what it's actually asking and respond differently than they would if it was just a straightforward question. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're avoiding confusing wording and especially negative wording or double negatives that are, again, testing cognitive ability rather than actually asking the question. Okay. And then the last bit of, making sure questions are well written, we want to focus on the order of our questions, which might not seem super important, but earlier items in a survey can definitely influence the way that responders interpret later items. So for example, if we're asking about affirmative action programs, if you're asking about, do you favor or oppose affirmative action programs for women? Do you favor or oppose affirmative action programs for minorities? So the way we word these or order these could influence how people respond later on. So things like if we put this women question first, gender discrimination, I would say, personally, I believe is less of a problem now than, racial discrimination and, equal opportunities for minorities is less than just women in general. So if you put this women question first, typically people are going to favor that, I would say. So then if they favor that and they go on and read one about minorities, they might say, well, I just said I favor, affirmative action for women. So I'm going to also say I favor that for minorities, right? So they're being primed by this first item, and then they realize later on, well, I said this, so maybe I can't go back and disagree with this one because that would make me look bad. Whereas if you change the order, perhaps they wouldn't favor affirmative action for minorities, right? But then they go on later and then they see women, so they would oppose this, but then if this was later on, they would favor that. And they're not going to go back and change the first answer. You see what I'm saying? So the way that our questions are ordered can prime the individual to respond to different questions later. And questions like this, there's been studies done, and if there's white individuals, again, responding, they're more likely to support the affirmative action for minorities if they were first asked if they support it for women. Okay, so there's definitely still some racial discrimination. Racism, obviously, is still a very prominent problem. People don't really realize. So the way we order our questions actually can really have a big influence on the way people respond. Okay, and so a way we can kind of get rid of this affecting our results is making different versions of the survey with questions in different orders. Okay, so no matter how we order the questions, it's going to affect, later on responses. And we really don't want that to affect our results at all. It's interesting to think about, how it's going to affect the results, but we want our results to be as, honest as possible. So if we have many versions of the survey with questions in all different orders, obviously for each individual person, there might be influence on the way they're responding, which is okay because not everyone is going to be influenced the same way. So it's kind of canceling out that priming or the influence of question order if everyone, sees the questions in a different format or different order, I should say. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. All right, so we have an example here. Democratic National Committee mail survey included a question that read, which aspects of Trump presidency do you find the most disturbing? Followed by a list of 15 suggestions, such as his reckless foreign policy decisions, his erratic temperament and judgment, so on and so forth. Okay, so in your opinion, the problem with this question is it leading, double-barreled, negatively worded, or no problem? The answer is it is a leading question, right? If we're saying which is the most disturbing, and then you go through a list of a bunch of negative things, obviously that's not a neutrally worded question. You're leading the respondent to answer a certain way, okay? So we want to avoid that. Okay, so there's some other things we can do to encourage accurate responses. So sometimes people use shortcuts. If they're answering a survey, but they might not want to really spend the time reading through everything, so they use shortcuts. One example of a shortcut is a response set, also known as non-differentiation, which is they basically just answer all the questions in the same way, right? So if it's a Likert scale, they answer strongly agree to everything because they just don't feel like reading through, whatever. Okay. There's specific type of response sets called acquiescence or yay saying. So it's a type of response set, so they are answering the same way every time, but they answer positively. Specifically, they're going to answer positively, so yes, strongly agree or agree to all the items instead of looking at each item individually. So a response set could be negative. They could answer neutral all the time. They could answer negative all the time. That's just answering the same thing over and over. Acquiescence is always answering positive. You can also have what's called fence sitting, which again is another example of a response set. And they're just going to answer neutrally or answer in the middle of the scale for all items. So if there's, neither agree or disagree, whatever is right in the middle, people will respond because they don't want to be too positive, too negative. They don't feel like reading, whatever. So they answer questions right in the middle. So obviously, these are all not good things. You don't want people to just, have a response set and not actually read through the question or give meaningful responses. So this can really weaken the construct validity because people aren't actually saying what they think, right? They're just answering a certain way to get the survey over with, whatever. So obviously they're all gonna weaken construct validity. So we can do different things where we, change the question, the way the question's worded, so that if we answer strongly agree to all of them, asking a question in different ways. So one would be strongly agree, one would be strongly disagree. If they were answering like the same thing, if that makes sense. We can get rid of the middle option. So instead of having a neutral, make them choose, disagree or agree, nothing in the middle. So there's ways we can kind of try to get around people doing this. But anytime there's a survey with multiple items, there's going to be some individuals who are going to use shortcuts. Okay, we can also use forced choice, so they can't just answer, on the Likert scale or semantic differential scale, the same thing every time. Each question has different answers that they have to pick from, not just, the scale. So that might help as well. Another thing people do is try to look good. Obviously, that makes sense. So most of us like to look good in other people's eyes. So when we're given a survey, instead of answering what we really feel, we answer based on the way we think someone's going to interpret our answers. Okay, so there's socially desirable responding, also known as faking good. So we're trying to look better than we are. So no matter, there's different ways this could come about, but you could try to appear smarter, stronger, thinner, happier, more successful. In your head, you come up with, you're smarter, so you always try to pick certain responses to look good. Also, there's instances that people want to look bad. So it's known as faking bad. Obviously, this is going to be less common, but sometimes respondents try to look bad. So they're going to either try to be more aggressive, deviant, nastier, whatever it is, for whatever reason that they think that this is what they want. But they pick answers to try to make them appear a certain way. Okay, so we can avoid this by making responses anonymous. So that there's not a name attached to the answers. This might allow people to be more, honest or truthful about their answers. But also, it's kind of a double-edged sword because if the survey is anonymous, then people might not take it as seriously, right? So if you're turning a paper in that your name's not attached to, You might, just circle random things just to get it over with if it's not tied to you in any way, or whatever. Okay, so obviously we want to do what we can to avoid people trying to look good or, sitting on the fence. You can include special items in the survey to identify socially desirable responders. You can also try to maybe, instead of asking for a self-report, ask a friend of the person to rate them. If you're having, instead of doing a self-report measure, have someone else rate the individual so they're, the individual is not trying to make themselves look better. There's also computerized ways that we can, analyze responses and figure out if people are responding a certain way. Okay. Obviously, there's going to be some issues with self-reporting. People self-report a lot of times more than they can know. So are people capable of reporting accurately about their feelings, thoughts, and behaviors? There are mixed beliefs on this. So if I ask you why you always buy a particular brand of yogurt, you might not actually know why, but you might tell me something that sounds reasonable, right? So if you always buy some sort of Greek yogurt, whatever, you just bought it once, you don't know why you buy it, you just bought it once, kept going back. If I ask you about it though, you might say, well, it's cheaper, or the packaging, or has no GMOs, organic, even though that might be a reason why you initially bought it, why you continue to buy it might not even be related. You might not know the true answer. Okay, so self-reporting obviously is not always going to be accurate because sometimes people don't really know why, they're doing things, and then they're going to make up answers because, you're asking them. So those answers might not always be accurate. Also, with self-reporting, if we're self-reporting on memories of events, obviously memories are not going to be as accurate as we think they are. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And a big issue is that confidence and accuracy are not related. So even though you're asking someone and they are confident about their answers, confident about a memory of an event, that does not mean that it's necessarily accurate. So there can be issues if you're having self-reports of different memories, different events. If you ask someone, when's the last time they got a car wash? What were you wearing on your birthday? What were you doing, when you got the letter, when you got accepted to a college in the mail, blah, blah, blah. Some memories of events obviously are going to be stronger than others. But even if someone's confident they remember, their memory might not be accurate. Okay, so self-reporting is good for some instances, but there's definitely things that we need to be cautious of. And another issue with some self-reports, studies have found that when individuals are rating products, their ratings on Amazon and the ratings on Consumer Reports are definitely not the same. Okay, so Amazon, obviously, people who buy the product can rate it. Anyone can rate it. Consumer Reports is an independent product rating firm. And researchers found that consumers' ratings weren't necessarily correlated with, the quality of the product or whatever, but more so with the cost of it and the prestige of the brand. So people obviously like a good deal. If they think they're getting some high quality, Gucci brand, whatever, they like that. But they're not necessarily rating the quality of the product. And studies like this suggest that people might not always be able to accurately report on the quality of the products they buy. So obviously different people are going to want different things out of the products. Sometimes people just want to wear things that have the name brand on them for their social status. People want a good deal. People want, whatever it may be. So self-reports, especially when it comes to products, can be an issue as well. Okay, so another thing that you need to look out for. So self-reports, surveys, and questionnaires are obvious questionnaires. Questionnaires was close. are obviously good tools, but another tool we can do to gather data is using observational research, which we've already talked about a little bit. But with observational research, a researcher watches people or animals and then systematically records their actions. Okay, so this can be used for frequency claims, obviously, but also association and causal. So we're going to talk mostly about frequency claims because it's a little more straightforward, but any type of claim can be uh, given using observational research. Okay, so for example, a study wants to know how much people talk, so comparing male versus female, there's a lot of speculation that females talk more. And if you did like a self-report questionnaire, people might not accurately be able to respond and say, how many words do they speak in a day, right? So the only way we can do this study is actually with observational research. So looking at how much people actually talk. So the study was done. They put microphones on, males and females, recorded a certain percentage of the day, and then figured out, how many words were spoken in a day. And they found that the average women spoke 16,215 words, men 15,669. So there was not a statistically significant difference in the average number of words per day, which goes against what a lot of people believe. Okay, but the only way we could have done this, right, is observationally. We can't ask people to report how many words or have them, keep track of their own words. Obviously, that's not going to be very accurate. So the only way we can get accurate data is to observe, people throughout the day. Other examples of observational research, there's one in your book talking about observing hockey parents. So in Canada, there is a lot of media coverage of hockey parents getting aggressive at youth hockey games. And again, there's, surveys and questionnaires that were given that, parents responded that they were very positive at games, but the other team was very negative and saying nasty things, so on and so forth. So researchers wanted to see, if that was accurate. So they did observational research where they observed and recorded the frequency of violent, negative behavior, and then positive or supportive behavior by parents. And they found that 64% of parents' comments were positive, 4% were negative. So the self-reports or questionnaires weren't accurate in assessing, the overall comment positivity or negativity at the hockey games. Okay, another example is researchers wanted to observe families at dinner in the evening. So they watched I don't know how many families, a number of families where both parents worked and were gone all day. So when they came home, they had dinner with the family, and they wanted to see, what type of conversations we're having during dinner. So they had a variety of different behaviors. So appreciation, distaste, reward, negotiation, health, pleasure were like the general topics. And then saw what the parents and the children were more likely to be talking about at the dinner table. The emotional tone overall was slightly positive, and they found, parents talked more about the food's health. The children talked about how they didn't like the food, so on and so forth. So again, if you were to have people self-report on this or have some sort of survey, obviously you probably wouldn't get very accurate results. So in some cases, observations are needed to get, accurate data. Okay. Are observations always better than self-report? Not necessarily. So there's different types of biases that we can have when we are observing someone. So the observer bias is when observers see what they expect to see. Okay, so let's say we watched a videotape of a man in his mid-20s. He was being interviewed. Before viewing the video, half of the class was told that the man was a graduate student, and half of the class was told that he was a criminal. Obviously, that's going to influence your opinion of the man and influence, his answer, how you perceive his answers, and how you observe the interview, right? So your own biases, your information that you have ahead of time influences how you observe, and you see what you expect to see. Okay, so if I told you the guy was a criminal, you might focus on some negative parts of the interview, whereas if he's a graduate student, you would focus on more positive parts of the interview. Or instead of being angry, you might say the graduate student is, just tired or stressed out because he's busy, so on and so forth. Okay, so observer bias definitely comes into play. So you want to make sure that when you are doing observations, you try to avoid all biases. Okay, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on as well. Another thing that we can have is what's called observer effects. So instead of the observer seeing what they want, with observer effects, the participants confirm observer expectations. So the participants, the people who are being observed, act in a certain way because of the observer, if that makes sense. So there's an example of Clever Hans, which was actually a horse, not a human participant. But he was a horse that's back in whatever day a while ago. He could add, subtract, multiply, divide, as well as a fifth grader. So they would have people come ask him math questions, and he would stomp his hoof to count, and would, get these questions correct again and again and again. And it was not just the horse's trainer that could get the horse to do this. Other people, if they asked the questions, the horse could answer them as well. So it was amazing, right? But then researchers kind of figured out that Hans was picking up on subtle nonverbal cues from the questions. So not only again from his trainer, but from random people who would ask the questions as well. So what they did is they had two people ask him the question. So they had one person ask the first half of the question, and the second person asked the second half of the question. So neither person knew the answer to the question. And when they did it this way, Hans couldn't answer the questions. Okay, so obviously Hans couldn't actually do the math. He was just picking up on those nonverbal cues, and it seemed like he was answering the questions when in reality he couldn't. Okay, so observer effects, think of Clever Hans the horse. The horse is acting a certain way based on, the observer observing them, how the observer is asking the question, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's see this. Which of the following is observer bias and which is observer effects? So research assistant records participants as stronger in the happy condition than the sad because it fits the hypothesis. Study participant performs with more strength in the happy mood condition because of subtle encouraging cues from the research assistant. A study participant feels self-conscious in the experiment. So observer bias, again, is where the observer records results that fit their hypothesis. So A is an example of observer bias. Okay, again, because it fits the hypothesis, the observer who's doing the observations records it to fit their belief. Observer effects, B would be an example of this. So the participant performs a certain way based on what they think is expected of them. Okay? There's ways we can prevent this. Well-trained observers and clear scales use inter-rater reliability. So again, we talked about inter-rater reliability, which makes sure that between different observers, you're going to get consistent results every time. Okay, so we talked about like head measuring or the student's success in school. So no matter who's measuring the success, it should be the same for everyone. So we can do this, we can use a masked design, also known as blind design. The observers don't know which condition the participants are assigned, so they're not aware what the study is about, who's, in what condition. They don't know, what should be actually supporting the hypothesis. So this is a way to make sure that there's no observer bias, and the participants don't know what the study is about, so there's not going to be any observer effects either. Okay. And a way we can ensure inter-rater reliability, I kind of skipped over this, is using clear scales, right? So something that we can use to make sure that, all researchers are observing the same is something called a code book. So this is an example of a code book. So if we have positive general, comments were defined as positive and directed at the team in general with no instructional content. Positive specific, comments were defined as being positive but directed at a specific player, so on and so forth. So this is in reference to that hockey game observations. So all the different researchers who were at the hockey game had the same code book. So when they're rating the comments of different people in the crowd, they use these same, definitions of these different terms to make sure that they're all classifying, different comments correctly. So a code book is really important in inter-rater reliability. Another thing we need to make sure we are not doing is having reactivity. So reactivity is when people change behavior in some way because they know they're being watched. So for example, if you're at the hockey game with the clipboard writing down people's comments, maybe people are not going to say what they normally would say because there's people there watching them. The example of, going and watching people at dinner, obviously those dinner conversations might be a little different if they know they're being watched and there's some unknown man in the house watching them, right? So people are going to respond and act different, change their behavior if they know they're being watched. So there's 3 ways we can try to avoid this. So we can blend in, so have unobtrusive observations. So instead of, sitting down with a clipboard, watching people writing down exactly what they're saying, try to blend in a little bit more, wear a hockey jersey. Maybe instead of writing down observations there, you're just recording what people are saying and then going and analyzing the results later. Another thing we could do is wait it out to let people become familiar with you around. So instead of just going to one dinner and seeing what, how the people act, family acts, go to every dinner for a week. So at the beginning, they might be acting different, but once they get used to you being there, they might go back to their old ways and talk, as if you weren't there at all. And the third way is measure the behavioral results, which is collecting unobtrusive data. So if you want to do a study, let's say, about the amount of junk food that college students eat, instead of going around watching them, seeing, what people are eating, look in the trash cans and look at the wrappers, right? Because that's telling you what's being eaten. You can collect it for a week and see, whatever the amount of Cheetos everyone's eating. But it's unobtrusive. So the people you're observing, you're not actually observing them. You're just observing the results of their data. Yeah. And then the last slide. Obviously, if we're doing observations, we want to make sure that these observations are ethical. So this is going to highly depend on the situation and the observations being done. Most researchers think it's ethical to observe people in public places. So if, you're in public at a concert, campus, bus stop, somewhere that you're naturally being observed by other people anyway, obviously you're not like watching someone in the private bathroom of their house or watching through their window, wherever. So if it's a public place, in most cases, it's thought to be ethical. When we're doing observations, scientists typically aren't going to specifically identify the people and the reports of the findings. So again, it's going to be kind of anonymous. They're not, watching, again, someone in their dorm and tallying how many times they eat Cheetos and, writing down the name of the person and all this, right? It's going to be more of an anonymous observation. And if researchers do want to observe private behaviors, then you need to get permission in advance. It's never okay to try to record private things, so you would need some informed consent ahead of time. Okay? All right, that should be it for this week. If you have questions, let me know. Read the chapter. Bye.